Okay, this is a video tutorial to talk you through the two FRQs on the practice exams. So they're broken down by 2015 and 16. 2016 is labeled Practice Exam B in your email. And Practice Exam B, the first question has to do with the economy of Saarland, which is operating below full employment. So anytime you see below full employment, you're going to get a short-run equilibrium that's to the left of long-run equilibrium. So it's where this red and green line intersect. It's to the left or behind long-run aggregate supply, so that's a recessionary gap. So this one, number one, is worth 9 points. This is the big one. This is one that's number one is always going to be a cumulative question because it's going to tie in a graph with several other graphs, and it's going to tie in several units. So for A is worth 2 points. What you have to do is you have to label the current output and price level, which would be Y1 and P1. As long as you do that, you get a point there. And then as long as you label YF, you get another point. So if you've done that, you're 2 for 2. You're 2 for 9 so far. For part B, it says if Saarland increases government expenditures and taxes by equal amounts, can aggregate demand increase? Explain. So this, you have to explain it in order to get the point. This is worth 1 point. And the answer is yes. Aggregate demand would increase because the spending multiplier, which is 1 over MPS, is greater than the tax multiplier, which is MPC over MPS. Because the tax multiplier is smaller than the spending multiplier, if you increase taxes and increase spending in the same amounts, you would still have a positive impact on aggregate demand. One is greater than the other. C, if Saarland decides to pursue an expansionary monetary policy, so you want to underline monetary, that's buying and selling bonds. Open market operations are buying and selling bonds. What should the central bank undertake? Because it's expansionary, they would want to buy bonds. That's growing the money supply. For D, what you have to do is draw a money market graph. This is that graph on the bottom right. You get 1 point for correctly drawing the graph. So as long as you draw a graph that has MS, MD, and then quantity, and then if you showed the correct shift, because they're buying bonds, the money supply curve is going to increase or move to the right, you get 2 points, 1 for drawing the graph and 1 for showing the correct shift. For part E, based on the interest rate change, so interest rates are falling when the money supply increases. It's asking, will the supply of currency in the foreign exchange market increase, decrease, or remain the same? Here, the supply of currency is going to increase because what people in Saarland are going to do, investors in Saarland are going to see that the interest rate there is lower, and they're going to go hunting for higher interest rates in other countries. And so because of that, they're going to supply more of their dollars in foreign exchange markets to get that higher interest rate. And so because of that, envision a supply and demand graph. When supply increases, rightward shift, price is lower. In this case, the value of the currency is lower. So for F, based on the answer, is the currency going to increase, decrease, or remain the same? The value of the currency is going to decrease. It's going to depreciate. The supply of currency shifts right, lowering the exchange rate, and makes it cheaper for foreigners. Anytime you have a depreciation, a lower valued currency, your exports are going to increase and your imports are going to decrease. Anytime you have depreciation, exports will increase and imports will decrease because now the goods you make are cheaper for foreigners. You have a lower valued currency, but now it's harder for you to buy foreign goods because it's more expensive. Your currency isn't valued as high in foreign exchange markets. So the answer for G, which is worth 1 point, would be exports will increase and imports would decrease. You don't even have to put the part about imports. They're just asking about exports. So that's number one. It's worth 9 points. A is worth 2. B is worth 1. C is worth 1. D is worth 2. E is worth 1. F is worth 1. And G is worth 1. For question 2 has to do with country A and the Phillips curve. You have to assume that the current unemployment rate is lower than the natural rate of unemployment. So let's say that the natural rate is 4% and the current unemployment rate is lower than that. So let's say it's 2% or 3%. And so you have to draw a long run and short run Phillips curve in part A and label the short run equilibrium point Z. So this is what your long run and short run Phillips curve should look like. B on here, I just had to find a graph on the internet. Point B would be like point Z in your FRQ, if that makes sense. This would be like point Z on your FRQ. If you labeled that, you get a point, and if you drew out the graph correctly, you get another point. So you 2 for 2 so far. Part B, which is worth 1 point. Based off the situation, this would be an inflationary gap. Identify a specific fiscal policy action that would bring the economy to full employment. That would be to increase taxes or cut government spending. You're looking for a contractionary policy. Anytime you're in an inflationary gap, you want to pursue contractionary policy. Fiscal is increase taxes, cut spending. That's 1 point. So hopefully you're 3 for 3. Part C, draw a correctly labeled graph of the loanable funds market and show the effect of the fiscal policy action. So based on contractionary fiscal policy, the government is going to borrow less. They're spending less and taxing more, so they don't need as much in loans. So the demand for loanable funds is going to decrease or shift left, which lowers the interest rate. That's worth 2 points. So all you have to do there, as long as you draw the graph correctly and show the shift, you get 2 points. So now hopefully you're 5 for 5. And the last part, which is D, which is worth 1 point, it says assume there's no fiscal policy action. So the government isn't getting involved. Will the short run Phillips curve shift to the right, left, or remain the same? So in this case, if the government's not getting involved over time in an inflationary gap, unemployment is low, prices begin to increase because workers bargain for higher wages, employers pay those higher wages because they're desperate for workers. This increases input costs and shifts short-run aggregate supply to the left. Anytime you have increased input costs, short-run aggregate supply shifts to the left. So this is stagflation. And you got to know the connection between stagflation and the short-run Phillips curve. Anytime there's stagflation, this short-run Phillips curve right here is going to move up and to the right, which would both increase inflation and unemployment. So if you put something in those terms, you would get 1 point. This one was worth 6 points total. Last question, the Bank of Uchena. Bank of Uchena has a balance sheet there, and the reserve requirement is 20%. Based off that $100,000 that the Bank of Uchena has, you have to calculate the dollar value of the reserves they're required to hold for Part A, which is worth 1 point. So 20% of $100,000 is $20,000. For Part B, given the current reserves, calculate the maximum value of additional loans they can make. So because they only have to keep $20,000, but they have $30,000 listed on their T-chart in reserves, they could still make another $10,000 in loans. $30,000 minus $20,000 is $10,000. A and B are worth 1 point each, so hopefully you're 2 for 2. Assume that E-Like, I don't know where they get these names from, raises $5,000 from a yard sale and deposited in his checking account. Does the money supply immediately change as a result of E-Like's deposit? The money supply does not change because that's already cash that's counted. The only time the money supply would change would be based off of buying or selling of bonds, new money put into the economy. Because this is already cash that's been counted in the money supply, it would not immediately change. That's worth 1 point. For D, calculate the maximum change in demand deposits, the banking system as a whole. So over time, if this money was put into the bank and then loaned back out, what you would do here is you'd find your money multiplier, which is 1 over the required reserve, 0.2. 1 over 0.20 is 5, times that $5,000 cash that E-Likes raised, you get $25,000. That's the maximum change in demand deposits over time. If you're looking for the change in the money supply, that would be $20,000. If instead it asks for the change in the money supply, that would be $20,000 because this $5,000 has already been counted. So the maximum change in the money supply would only be $20K. Make sure you know that distinction between change in demand deposits and change in money supply.